Can you testing 1, 2, 3? Testing. Good evening, dear friends. My name is Art Laffin. I'm with the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker and the Journey of Hope. And as we gather tonight, just let us bring into our presence all the holy cloud of witnesses that have gone before us and who are now advocating for us, including members of our families and our communities that we're part of, especially Brother Bill, who's right here with us, always in spirit, Rennie Cushing, Greg Wilhoit, and so many others. We can name them as the 4 days go on here for the fast and vigil. And so as we begin, I like to sing a song about keeping your eyes on the prize, and certainly the holy cloud of witnesses help us to do that. And today, actually, in the Catholic Church, is the anniversary of the martyrdom, the executions of St. Peter and Paul. And so we call them into our presence, and we summon them to help us to keep our eyes on the prize. Paul and Silas, bound in jail. We could also say, Peter and Paul, bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. I can't hear you. The only thing that we can stand is the chain of hand in hand. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on that prize. Hold on. Friends, we are in some perilous times, but we're going to keep our eyes on the prize. Paul and Silas began to pray, and those chains just fell away. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. And the death row exonerees here know this verse very well. Paul and Silas began to shout. The jail door opened. They walked out. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Right shoes are on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. We've known hatred and violence too, but God's love can see us through. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Good job, Art. You got to hold on to each other now more than ever. Amen.
No.
Charles. This brother here, Abolish, one of our main organizers in the country to abolish state-sanctioned killing, and we are so grateful for the work of Abe and Charles and everybody at Death Penalty Action and all the amazing, tireless work they are doing to end the death penalty. Abe Bonowitz.
Thank you, Art, and welcome everybody to the 32nd annual Fast and Vigil to Abolish the Death Penalty. It's the 32nd year in a row that we've been doing this. It was founded by Bill Pelkey, of blessed memory, Kathy Ford, Marietta Yeager, Rick Halprin, they all send their greetings, even Bill, and his welcome, their welcome. This was started on the sidewalk outside the U.S. Supreme Court, where we would be, for those who are watching us online, if rain wasn't imminent, but we're inside tonight, but it's also much nicer in here in terms of the temperature. But we're grateful to be closing out our first day of the 4-day annual fast and vigil to abolish the death penalty at the U.S. Supreme Court here on June 29th. It's the 53rd anniversary of the date in 1972, when the U.S. Supreme Court struck down all the death penalty laws in the country, forcing states that wanted to have a death penalty to write new laws. And then we're going to be here for these 4 days until July 2nd at midnight, when on July 2nd in 1976, some of the new death penalty laws were upheld. And that allowed the resumption of executions. And we're going to hear a lot more about that and what's happened ever since and what's happening today. Tonight, we have a terrific program. And I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. Thanks to everybody that has helped make this happen. We're going to hear from some of our sponsors tonight as well. And we are grateful tonight to have the leadership and Masters of Ceremony Services from the Impacted Communities Liaison for Death Penalty Action. Please welcome Charles Keith.
Hello, everybody. As Abe said, my name is Charles Keith. I'm the Impacted Communities Liaison for Death Penalty Action. I normally come and I talk about my brother that was on death row. I rarely get a chance to talk about my brother that actually found death. I had a brother that was murdered in 2007. He was shot in the back. Me and my brother Kevin, we talked about it because we were always discussing death. Because what if I die, Chuck? What's going to happen to the family? What's going to happen to this? But we never thought that we were going to lose another brother in such a horrible way, especially a murder for what he was sitting in prison for, an innocent man. And people thought that somebody was targeting our family, but it was not. But we never got a chance to address it. We never got a chance to talk about it. In fact, this is something that we do not talk about because he hasn't had a chance to get out for the two of us to hug and cry and discuss my brother Durad. So that's just been something that we have not addressed in all these years. So it's like we've been saving it. I don't even go to the cemetery. I don't discuss it. You know, it's another one of those family tragedies. And one of the things that was really bad is to get that kind of news when you're already fighting the death penalty. You're already fighting death. And, you know, my mom, there's so many things that she didn't understand. She's saying, why? And I was like, Mom, I think everybody has those type of questions. But, you know, we laid Durad to peace. We laid him to rest. The children, I mean, they lost it because we were already disorganized. You know, we didn't function well as a family. I call ourselves a death penalty family, you know, because you're talking 3 generations, the people above us, my mother, myself, and then the children below us. And it's hard to educate them when something like that is inside their minds. So, you know, we've had a lot of mental health issues. We've had a lot of behavior with the kids. And most of the time, it's because we cannot answer their questions. It's why would people want to do something like this? And if my brother Kevin is innocent, why won't they let him go? And try to explain something to children, teens, and anything, how cruel people can be. And, you know, it's not like they're walking around with a cruel shirt on. It's hard to find out who those cruel people are. Very difficult. Usually it's when you try to ask them for help. And in my experience, it happened, you know, in asking someone for help, it was always said to me, I'm praying for you. That's the least I can do. And that has stuck with me, and it hurt me so bad because here's a person that's only offering me prayer because it's the least thing he can do for me. So I asked myself, what more could he do? What's the most he could do? So if praying is it, you can't even prove to me that you've prayed for me. So I jokingly, and I told Abe, I says, well, let me show you the power of prayer in my mind. I'm coming down the street and I see 3 guys over there beating you half to death. And you happen to look up past his knee, and that'll be me over across the street praying for you. Or would you want me to come and help you? And that's something that I had to start thinking. So that's what helps bring me out to help other people. I'm not going to be that guy that's over there praying for others. I'm going to get out and put some action to that. They say faith with no works is dead. So that's what brought me out. You know, we got a nice crowd here. And one thing, you know, when Jesus was being executed, you see everybody pushing away, denying him, and backing back, you know, backing away from that whole scenario. What I'm seeing today is people getting nearer to that cross. They're walking closer to that cross because you're finding out so many other truths that you did not know. You're finding out different things from other different religious denominations, which has brought us together. You know, we separated ourselves, but our voices are going to become louder. It's going to become so loud that he's going to hear all of this. And we're going to see and witness that miracle the same way that they witnessed his death. We're going to get a chance to witness the miracle. Okay. I'd like to introduce Marie Oswalt. Marie came here last year. She brought the noise, you know, and it's nice to see when people are there for 1 year that they come back. You don't know who's going to come. I kind of sort of do, but you don't know who's going to continue to come back. And seeing her again, I mean, that's pleasure. That's letting you know that we're doing something. That's progress. Because when we get you, we keep you here. So I'd like to introduce Maria. She's from Atlanta, and she's with Rehumanize International. Maria.
Thank you so much. So as Charles said, my name is Maria Oswalt, and I am here representing Rehumanize International. We're an organization that promotes what we call the consistent life ethic. So it's a consistent respect for human life from conception to natural death. We always love coming out to this event and collaborating and standing alongside the Abolitionist Action Committee, Death Penalty Action, and everyone who has showed up this weekend to call for true justice and mercy for those on death row. I wanted to share a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Alabama. Sorry, I'll try to speak up. I know I can be soft-spoken. So I was born and raised in Alabama, and I actually grew up supporting the death penalty. I remember writing a persuasive essay in support of it when I was for my 11th grade English class. At the time, I had this idea that people on death row had relinquished their right to life, and I very naively assumed that everyone who was on death row had committed whatever crime they were accused of, and I assumed the justice system was actually just. But I can remember the moment that my perspective changed. It was my sophomore year of college in 2015, and a film professor came into my internship and showed us a documentary he was working on. It followed a man named Anthony Ray Hinton, who had just been exonerated at that time from Alabama's death row after spending nearly 3 decades on it for a crime that he didn't commit. I saw the look on Mr. Hinton's face as he was reunited with his family for the first time in 30 years. I remember his facial expression was this mix of relief and joy, but also sadness about the time that was lost. And it shattered all of my naive assumptions that I had made about capital punishment. It opened my eyes to the reality that my home state's justice system was not as just as I wanted to believe. And in fact, it could be so wildly unjust as to make an innocent man spend half his life behind bars and then give him no compensation for the mistake that they made. Beyond just making me realize that innocent people could be sentenced to death, seeing his face also made me realize that in my previous support for the death penalty, I really hadn't learned the names of the people who were impacted by it, or I hadn't looked at their faces. Up until that point, I had thought about capital punishment as this sort of vague philosophical question, and I had pictured death row inmates as a faceless, guilty group that I could write off as disposable. And suddenly I was confronted with the actual people involved, not just the innocent, but the guilty too. There's a quote from the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas that really resonates with me. It says, "The face opens up the primordial discourse whose first word is obligation." Viewing the face of another human being seems commonplace, but it can be really intimate too. It reminds us of the respect that we owe each other. It reminds us of our shared human dignity. And for those who believe in God, it's the imago Dei, it's the image of God in every single human person. That's why it can be so easy for us to ignore the humanity of certain groups whose faces we don't typically see. So the death row inmate, the child in the womb, the migrant in the detention center, the civilian who's in a war-torn country. Seeing Mr. Hinton's face that day challenged me to seek out the stories and the faces of those impacted by the death penalty. And it really pushed me to embrace this consistent respect for human life and get involved with Rehumanize International. I came to realize that the inalienable right to life should really be inalienable. No level of personal guilt justifies giving the state the power to execute its citizens. So that's what brings me here today. And I'm so grateful to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to have face-to-face conversations, shining light on the injustice of the death penalty. Thank you.
When did he come in here yet? John Holden, yeah. Wow, yeah, I know who this is. I've had several conversations with this gentleman, several conversations, all great man. See him every year. I come here. I've been coming here about 4 years, you know. I've always caught him with a sincere smile. Definitely sincere smile. I kept telling Abe, I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him. And the minute I saw him, I knew exactly who it was. Sometimes it's hard for us to keep up with names, especially when we only see each other once a year. But we certainly do not forget faces. And I'd like right now to introduce John Holden.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everybody. I'm grateful for the opportunity, the invitation to speak a little bit. Abe asked me to talk a little bit about one of the groups that I'm involved with as a volunteer. I'm part of several groups that, like us, oppose the death penalty. And at least two of those groups are sponsors of the Fast and Vigil. One of them is Pax Christi, the International Peace Movement. And another one that Abe wanted me to be sure to talk a little bit about is one that my wife, Mary, who's also here, and I are involved with. It's the Marianist Social Justice Collaborative, or MSJC. So the Marianist Social Justice Collaborative began in 1998 with the goal of promoting education and action for social justice within what is called the, quote, Marianist family. So what is that? That includes some Catholic religious brothers, religious sisters, and lay people like Mary and me. MSJC works through 7, quote, justice teams. And one of those teams, one of the originals, is the Death Penalty Abolition and Restorative Justice Team. Mary is the chair of that team. It's also, we call it DPRJ to shorten the name. Team members have been located in several states, including Maryland, Ohio, Texas, California. We're small in number, but we work in collaboration with other organizations like Journey of Hope, Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, Ohioans to Stop Executions, and of course, Death Penalty Action. And indeed, Abe has been kind enough to join us for a couple of our in-person meetings in the past. One was in February 2022. He was hoping to be there in person, but ended up coming in remotely because he was traveling to an execution. And the other was just a year ago this month. He joined us in last June in Dayton when we were celebrating a couple of our long-term members who were transitioning. So let me read part of this Death Penalty Abolition Team mission, because it tells a little about MSJC and what motivates us and why Mary and I are involved. This is the first part of it. We, as members of the Marianist family, because of our belief in the sanctity of all human life and in the dignity of all persons, pledge ourselves to prayer, education, reflection, and action to abolish the death penalty. The death penalty is unjust, inhumane, and inconsistent with the gospel message. We seek to change hearts and minds concerning this injustice. As a positive step, we promote restorative justice, a community-centered approach to justice which views crime as a violation of people and relationships rather than simply a violation of law. So the DPRJ team has worked and is working to abolish the death penalty throughout the US, but especially in states where its members live. We've seen abolition in Maryland, which is where Mary and I live. We're still actively working in Ohio and Texas by supporting local organizations to support their work, their legislative actions. And we've also collaborated with a group from Florida, Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and with Catholic Mobilizing Network, which is, or CMN. I don't have a story like some of the people from whom you're going to hear over the next few days, but I want to just touch on a couple of the background efforts by Catholics and others to commute the sentences of those on federal death row. As you know, in July 2017, the Trump administration resumed federal executions after 17 years without any, and it led to 13 executions in just 6 months. And in response, CMN, Catholic Mobilizing Network, began online prayer vigils that are now held each month to remember victims of violent crime and those who are scheduled to be executed that particular month in the US. And of course, and Mary and I have participated in those vigils. But of course, Death Penalty Action, I want to hold them up because they hold vigils on the ground in the places where the executions are occurring, and which is wonderful. You might know that in September 2022, the Vatican created a Pope's prayer video for the abolition of the death penalty. And in that video, which was shared worldwide, Pope Francis said the following, among other things: capital punishment offers no justice to victims, but rather encourages revenge. And it prevents any possibility of undoing a possible miscarriage of justice. Additionally, the death penalty is morally inadmissible, for it destroys the most important gift we have received, life. And then he said more, of course. So over several years, various Catholic organizations and others have held a variety of meetings, both in Rome and parts of the US, and especially with the media to help build support for these commutations of the federal death row. And in November 2024, the director of CMN had an opportunity to hand deliver a request to Pope Francis to contact President Biden, who is Catholic, to urge those federal commutations of death sentences. And the next month, in December 8th, his Angelus prayer at the Vatican, Pope Francis took an unusual step, actually, of mentioning specifically the death penalty situation in the US. Part of what he said is, today I feel compelled to ask all of you to pray for the inmates on death row in the United States. Let us pray that their sentences be commuted or changed. Let us think of these brothers and sisters of ours and ask the Lord for the grace to save them from death. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, December 23rd, 2024, President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 men on federal death row, sparing their lives. Though there were 3 others on death row whose sentences weren't commuted, this was still a truly milestone moment that was celebrated by all of us here and across the country. So MSJC, or the Marianist Social Justice Collaborative, continues its work to abolish the death penalty. Our DPRJ team, Death Penalty Abolition team, will be meeting in person in September in San Antonio, Texas, where we expect to meet with others in the Marianist family and in the San Antonio community, and with some people at St. Mary's University Law School. Mary and I would be happy to provide more information about these groups and these activities that I've mentioned, and especially MSJC. But right now, let me just say how grateful I am to Abe and to each of you here and to the people watching online and to everybody in this abolition movement for really tremendous, inspiring work to end this scourge of the death penalty. Thank you.
You know, we got a powerful group here, some strong spirits, very strong spirits. The group's getting larger. It's looking good. I got to tell you, when I was truth seeking, when my bedroom was my church. And on one side, I had a bunch of law books, which I didn't have a clue what they were. And on the bed, I had a bunch of Bibles, which I didn't have a clue what they were. I had no idea there were so many different religions, so many different religious denominations, so many different views people saw. I had no idea until I started fighting the death penalty. And I realized in order to do what I wanted to do, I had to have a piece of everybody in me. So I made sure I introduced myself to their doctrine. I made sure I read stuff. I made sure I interacted with them. I made sure I did these things because, again, these are the people that I need. I found out that I could not do this by myself. So, looking for my Savior, and that was a very important word to me because I asked him, Lord, will you save me? And, it's funny because he did. But he asked me, will you do the work? That's what he asked me. And I said, yes. And that's why I can stand in front of you now and talk to you, because had my brother been executed, I could not do this work. And because my brother was not executed, it lifted that big burden off my heart. And it gave me the opportunity to come out and some of the things that I've learned to be able to come out and help others that are on death row. I mean, this was a very, very, very hard thing. Well, I've listened to some of a lot of people's stories. We're going to bring up George White. He's got a great story. I've come here. I've heard George on so many different occasions. I can almost tell his story, but he tells it so much better than me. See? So I'm going to let George White come up here and tell you his story. I'm not going to steal it from him. Maybe next year. Maybe next year. George White.
Yeah. Yeah. At least I'll start out standing. If I go, then pull it up. My name is George White, and I presently call Northern Virginia home. Abe asked me to do a very brief version of my story, and I'll try to honor that. On February 27, 1985, I was living my little piece of the American dream. I was married. My wife's name was Charlene. I called her Char. We had two small children. Our son Tom was 12 and daughter Christy was 5. I was vice president and general manager of an independent chain of building supplies. We had 2 houses, 2 cars, and 2 dogs. If you can be a yuppie in Southeast Alabama, I guess I was. That evening, Char and I had planned to go out to dinner and a movie, and the kids were spending the night with a grandmother. Got a call at the house before we left from a man who said he had kind of an emergency situation. It had a circuit breaker go out that was hooked up to his freezer. Was there any way I could help him out? And I kind of mumbled under my breath and said, yeah, I'll tell you what, meet you out there at the store in 15 or 20 minutes. And when I hung up the phone, I told Char, and she said, well, why don't I go with you? Maybe you won't get caught up too long, and maybe we can make dinner in the 7 o'clock movie. We went out. When we got out to the store, there wasn't anybody there yet. We went on inside. We were there maybe 5 minutes when there was a knock at the door. And I went to that door expecting a grateful customer. Instead, I was confronted by a man with a gun. I opened a safe. I gave him what was there. Char gave him her purse. I gave him my wallet. And then he told us to go out there, and he pointed out to the showroom area where the cash registers were. Of course, I knew there wasn't money in the registers, but he had the gun. As we started to the door from the office, Char was beside me. He was a little bit behind. And I stepped forward to push open the door and turned to look to see which way he wanted us to go. And at that point, Char stumbled. And the first shot was fired. And again, and again, and again, and again. My next conscious thought, I was lying on the floor, and he was gone. And I looked over, and Char was laying face down in a pool of blood, a large pool of blood. I retreat from that next image that will forevermore be seared into my memory. I reached over and I lifted Char's head, and then I saw her face. And I had looked into the insanity and horror of murder and what those bullets had done to my beautiful wife's face. I retreat from that X'd image, which is forevermore seared into my memory. Obviously, I lived. I'd been struck 3 times in the right leg, in the arm, and in the abdomen. Char was struck twice, and he missed with 1 shot. It was, for me, the beginning of a nightmare that went on and on and on. Obviously, I lived. Char died. I went from a murder victim family member, to the suspect and accused. And when the justice system, such as it is, turned on me, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I understood what was happening. I just couldn't grasp it emotionally. I knew what didn't happen, but then we had to attempt to prove I didn't do it. And I had a lawyer. His name's Paul Young. He's still practicing law in Enterprise, Alabama, and he is my dearest friend on the face of the earth. Paul stuck by me. Make a long story extremely short. 16 months later, I was arrested and charged with the murder of my wife capitally. 14 months later, we went to trial. I was still clinging to what I'd been brought up to believe, that once we got to trial, the truth would out and justice would prevail. I knew it couldn't be made right, but I thought it would be brought back into some kind of balance, and I was wrong. Following a 2-week trial, the state of Alabama asked a jury to condemn me to death. I was convicted. However, I was fortunate I didn't get a death penalty. I instead got life, which in my estimate was another way of dying day by day. I spent the next 2 years, 103 days, in an Alabama prison. And then through the efforts of Paul and several others, my conviction was overturned. And at that point, it didn't have anything to do with the fact of my innocence. It was because I had received an unfair trial. Of course, I knew that. But then it was another 3 years. I went back to being the accused, and the state kept delaying the trial. They knew how bad this thing smelled. But finally, 3 years later, and through the efforts of Paul and several other people, uncovered evidence proving my innocence. 104 separate items of evidence that was hidden from us for more than 7 years. Evidence that proved my innocence, not only beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond all doubt. And finally, the state came forward with a motion to dismiss and the charge against me was forevermore dismissed. What began with a bang ended with a whimper. It was dismissed with prejudice, which means they could never raise it against me again. That's the short version, folks. Now, during all of that, my sister and her husband took in my children and gave them a home. They were some 400 miles away down in Central Florida. I was filled with anger, with bitterness, with hatred. I hated not only the man that murdered my wife, but I had this whole long list of folks within the system that had failed me. But it wasn't hatred that sustained me, folks. It was love. It was the love of my children, some family, some friends, far fewer than I once thought I had. It's amazing how quickly people will bail on you when trouble comes. But on 1993, all charges were dismissed and free at last, free at last. Well, a few months later, I had gone to work for the Alabama Prison Project in Alabama as a mitigation specialist. I had been educated by the law, and I started helping defense attorneys by gathering evidence and what have you, and presenting it in court. But I was having a difficult time of trying to rebuild my life, and then a few months later, I found out about that. I went on the first journey in Indiana, and as my brother Bill would tell you if he was still here, I haven't shut up since. And I find that this is still a difficult time for me, because Bill became like my brother for many, many years. If you saw Bill Pelkey, you turned and you'd see me. Or if you saw me and turned, you saw Bill Pelkey. And I know I'm not the only one that misses him, but I damn sure do. Huh? Anyway, it was through the influence of Bill that because Bill talked about forgiving, and Bill and I traveled all over the world together. At one point, we were down in Mexico City, and went someplace to eat that night, and we started writing on the back of a napkin how many states we'd been together and spoke in, and how many countries. And at that time, it was 42 states and 10 countries. And like I say, I'm missing. And my daughter, Christy, she once told me, after my son and daughter came in to see me after I'd been arrested, and I was in handcuffs and leg irons and a belly chain, and my children came in a room off from the courtroom. There was going to be a custody hearing. My son came through the door and he ran over and threw his arms around me. And then my daughter came in and she walked slow and she had her head down. And when they came up to me, Tom put his arm around my shoulder, and I kept looking at Christy, and I said, "Baby, do you know what's happening?" And she said, "They said you killed Mommy." I said, "Baby, do you think I could have hurt you or Mommy?" She said, "No." But then she pointed at the chains, and she said, "But why, Daddy? Why?" And I had no words. How could I explain to my daughter what I couldn't explain to myself? But then my son, who at that time was, 14 years old? Huh? At that time, she was 6. Tom said shrimp. He called his baby sister shrimp every once in a while. He said, "You think Dad could hurt you?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, like Dad said," he said, there's some people in the system that are wrong, but we've got to believe in him." And Christy looked up and she smiled. And she crawled into my lap. And she hugged me. Through the example of my children, Paul Young, that man, someone you hear, that when Paul came to get the kids and take them out, Tom hugged me, kissed me on the cheek, started out. Christy did the same, and she got almost to the door, and she turned around and she looked, and I was holding it together. Daddy's got to hold it together for the babies. Then Christy ran back, and she stood in front of me. I was sitting in the chair there, and she reached and she touched outside my eye, and she said, "Daddy, you remember what Jesus said when his friend Lazarus died?" I said, "Lazarus." She said, "Same fella." She said, "It's okay to cry, Daddy." And ever since then, I've shed tears many times. And at times I've been a little bit they've hurt, but I've never been ashamed of it. Well, that's about the shortest version as I can get. But
Wow. Just think about all the stories that you haven't heard. There's so many people that are afraid to come out. They don't come out. It takes courage to come out. It takes courage to be an activist. It takes courage to be an abolitionist. When you start following those words, I kept looking up that word abolitionist. And man, it took me to some of the most terrible times in our country. And now we're those abolitionists. That's who we are. And you go back and look at some of their fights, a lot of them lost their lives. A lot of them lived in fear because they were doing the right thing. Is that what they say? The Lord says the things that will happen to you because you fight in his name. So many things that he tells you, you know, so many things I've heard as a child, but it never came into practice until I got older. And then I started understanding as I matured and became a man, I started understanding what the Lord was trying to put into me himself. And what I spit out was him. I no longer became me. I was not important. How could I be? How could I be more important than anybody in this room when he created us all equal? And that's something I had to understand, was that equal piece. And we were all equal. Well, I'm going to tell you about a guy that we always listen to on Zoom all the time. I don't think we could do a good, successful Zoom without him. I don't care what question you have. If we didn't have this gentleman there, they would not be answered. So we all have been blessed to have this gentleman sit there on these Zooms and answer a lot of legal questions. I mean, he's really digging in to give us these answers. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Rob Dunham. Yeah. And when you're done, I got 100 questions for you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is always a pleasure to be here. This year, we face a very different world than we've had, well, maybe since 5 years ago. But in this second coming of the want-to-be dictator, we have seen some basic changes in the way the United States operates. And it shouldn't be a surprise that the death penalty was one of the first areas in which the attack on democracy in this country began. It wasn't with the second inauguration. It was with the first presidency. And in that first term, more civilian executions were taken by the federal government in 6 months and 1 week than had been done since the 1800s. More executions took place after he lost the presidential election and before the transition to President Biden than had ever occurred in any transition period in the history of the United States. And so knowing that, it shouldn't have been a surprise that on the first day in which he was in office, he released an executive order so filled with hatred and vitriol that all of us shuddered. Much of the damage had already been done. Much of the damage took place with the stacking of the United States Supreme Court. And in the first term, at the end of 2020 going into 2021, the United States Supreme Court lifted every stay of execution and vacated every injunction that a lower court had entered to stop the federal executions. And these stays and these injunctions were not issued by liberal judges. They were issued by judges of all political persuasions, including very conservative Republican judges. And they were not issued for no reason. They were issued in every case because the defendant whom the government wanted to execute had demonstrated a likelihood of success on the merits, or had demonstrated that the issues in the case were serious enough to deserve further consideration by the courts. It was the shadow docket with the death penalty that began the assault on the US Constitution. And we have seen now the lengths to which that assault is going. It shouldn't be a surprise that the death penalty policies of the other US states, with very red attorneys general and very red governors, are parroting the hate speech from this administration. And it shouldn't be a surprise that in an administration that is attacking diversity, or shall we say inclusion, equity, or shall we say fairness, that this would inspire states like Florida to pass a new death penalty law that makes a mandatory death sentence for anyone who is an undocumented alien who commits a criminal offense, a capital offense. Now, we know this administration has no regard for the Constitution. We also know that this administration has been empowered by the United States Supreme Court to act with impunity because it has immunity. And so it is doing so. It is encouraging states to pass laws to challenge the constitutional decisions of the United States Supreme Court across the board. But in no area has the challenge been so broad as it is with the death penalty. That executive order explicitly suggested to states that they should pass new laws to challenge Supreme Court's decisions that say you cannot impose the death penalty in a case in which no one is killed. And states have followed suit. So, let me tell you another area in which states have followed suit. For 9 consecutive years, we have had fewer than 30 executions in the United States. The longest sustained period of executions that low. We've had 25 in the first 6 months this year. It is likely we will have another 18 to 20. That will be more executions than we've seen in more than a decade. And it is likely to be probably more than 2 decades going back in time. Now, we are not going to return to 1999 when 98 people were put to death in the United States. We are not going there. But this is a very dangerous time. And why is it so dangerous? Because states now feel as though they can get away with anything. The United States Supreme Court has told them we are not going to stop you. And their state Supreme Courts are not going to stop them either. Am I just making this up? No. And, you know, I'm a data nerd, so I have some facts I can back this up with. Right? So I looked at every death warrant signed in the United States since 2016. All right, so I'm maybe not a good person to talk to at a tea party. But what I found was there has been a profound change in the way courts are looking at these cases, and that profound change has had a profound impact. in the 9 years from 2016 through last year, an average of just over 1/3 of all death warrants were carried out. In other words, we stopped 2/3 of them. And in that 9-year period, 1/3 of all the death warrants were stopped by courts with stays of execution. This year, more than 2/3 of the death warrants are being carried out. Less than 11% of the death warrants are being stopped by courts. It's a profound change. It's what happens when courts of law become masters of lawlessness. So we have our work cut out for us. Now, before I tell you how I think we can make things better, I'm going to make you feel worse. Always happy to help, Kathleen. I mentioned earlier diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the attack on the US melting pot. Because when I grew up, I understood that we aspired to be a melting pot, and whatever color you were didn't make a difference. Whatever nation you came from didn't make a difference, because we would all be blended into this great country of America. There was nothing that said, the melting pot, well, we can't put in anything that's got any color in it. And you're not white enough if you didn't come from Europe or South Africa. $1 billion helps. We could use some too. The attack on diversity isn't understood properly as an attack on diversity. It has to be understood as who is being uplifted by this. Okay? It is a promotion of whiteness, and not just whiteness in general, a specific type of whiteness. Now, the way the law frequently works, and we all know this from our past experiences and from our experience with law enforcement, is that the law tends to get enforced in order to protect people who are favored. And we've had long experience with the death penalty being administered proactively with favored victims and pursued less frequently with less favored victims, right? So naturally, I look at some more numbers. Over the past year, the past calendar year, we have had 43 executions. That's from June 26th of last year to June 25th of this year, 43 executions. In 11 of those 43 cases, the defendants were Black and the victims were white. That's 25% of the cases. Now, it's been taking roughly 21 years for a case to go from the final death sentence imposed in courts to the time of the execution. And the average amount of time that an individual now spends on death row has surpassed 20 years. So if we go back in time, that takes us back to about 2005. So I looked at the Bureau of Justice Statistics data, the FBI data from the start of the death penalty, the restart of executions in 1976, and took that up through 2025. And I said, so who was killing who during that time? I mean, we all know that the most likely combination of defendant, offender, and murderer and victim in US murders is somebody of one race against somebody else of that same race. Okay? So we shouldn't have any great statistical disproportionality based on racial combinations. Well, it turns out that over that period, with hundreds of thousands of murders, 50.6% of the victims were white. Okay. 75% of the executions involved cases in which victims were white. The last 22 executions in the United States have been in cases in which the victim is white and only white. That is one short of the longest string in the modern history of the United States death penalty. And you know, all the ads during the political years about the fear of crime and whose faces are being shown to inspire fear. It is people of color. What percentage of murders in the United States are committed by African Americans with white victims? 7%. Wouldn't have known that from watching the TV ads. I wouldn't have known that from watching the crime programs on TV. 7.3%. And what percent of the executions? 20.5%. That is 2.8 times the rate at which those murders occur. And this last string over the last 12 months, 25.6%. 3.5 times over the rate at which those murders occur. It seems as though, for purposes of diversity and inclusion, there's only one policy that some of these folks want to apply that to. So we have a real problem. And what you have to understand is what we're seeing, while it is a significant and serious problem with the death penalty, reflects everything else that is going on in American society today. And so when we take action to try to make sure that bad things don't continue to happen with the death penalty, we have to keep the rest of society in mind as well. The biggest enemy of the death penalty in the United States is a full and fairly operating democracy. So what can we do about it? Where does the death penalty take place? It's not a national policy, although it is a national problem. It is a state policy. And so we must address it first at the state level. And that means identifying everybody who is a decision maker in the death penalty process and holding their feet to the fire. And if they will not do the right thing, then replace them. That means we must become active in state politics. We must become active in state legislative races, in state judicial races, because this United States Supreme Court will not abolish the death penalty, but the Washington Supreme Court did. The Delaware Supreme Court did. And did the vote go through today? No, it's tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Delaware Senate is going to pass a constitutional amendment to ban the death penalty in Delaware. And that will complete the first stage, because they've got to do it twice. They've got to do it in 2 straight legislative sessions. But that was a product of our action at the state level. So look to the state legislatures and talk to the state legislatures. Let those who are in now know that we are not in the 1990s, no matter what some politicians are trying to make people think. And that the American people have not been fooled. Has support for the death penalty gone up? No. For the first time in history, the Gallup poll now shows that more Americans think the death penalty is unfairly administered than think that it is fairly administered. With all these ads, in the congressional races, in the gubernatorial races, in the Senate, all of them, and all of this fear mongering, did support for the death penalty rise? No. Gallup found that support for the death penalty was the lowest it had been in 50 years. Oh, and opposition to the death penalty had grown as well, because sometimes people just decide they're undecided. That means that when people think about what's going on, they know it's unfair. And that means that the time is ripe to get off our butts and do something about it. I love your prayers, but they are not votes in the state legislature. So that's where to look. All right, I said the states where the action is, well, all right, partly. Because while the states control the death penalty laws, the action on the death penalty is in the counties. County district attorneys are the ones who decide that they're going to take taxpayer resources and try to kill a human being with it. So that means that we also have to be even more active in our local elections. Who is running for district attorney or county attorney or whatever they call the attorney who is prosecuting in your county, in your district? Who is that? For most of the history of the last 50 years in this country, district attorneys have run unopposed. And nobody really seems to know what's going on. Well, we need to. And in my hometown, Philadelphia, we figured out how to do it. Larry Krasner has not sought the death penalty over 2 terms. And he just got renominated with 60% of the vote, even with a challenge by an establishment former judge. So it can be done. And 2014, just before I came into the Death Penalty Information Center, we did I think one of the most important studies we ever did, looking at where the death penalty was imposed and who was doing what. And we found, well, guess what? Half of everybody on death row in the United States came from 2% of the counties in this country. 60 counties were responsible for half of everybody on death row. Now, by the time I left DPIC, and of course, I can't take credit for this, but it sounds good this way. By the time I left DPIC, we looked at it again. We looked at the numbers again in 2023. It was down to 1.2% of the counties. Counties are abolishing the death penalty. So we need to keep the pressure on local prosecutors. We need to get involved in the local races. We need to get involved if they're judicial races and find out where judges stand. Because lo and behold, a judge who makes a fair ruling in a capital case is more likely to have a non-capital outcome. Well, who would have thunk that? If you have a fair trial, you're less likely to get a death sentence. As I said, the greatest enemy of the death penalty is a fairly operating democracy. And that includes the fair operation of the courts. So we need to take action where we can take action. We need to take action where it will produce results. And we know where that is. So let's do it.
the 37 men who were commuted. We hear rumors that they're being sent to Colorado.
They've already all been designated.
Yeah, the question is, what has happened to the 37 federal death row prisoners who received commutations? And I need to give you a little history for you to understand just how pernicious the actions of this administration have been. The single most likely outcome of a death sentence, once it is imposed in this country, is that the conviction or death sentence will be overturned and the former death row prisoner is not resentenced to death. Okay? So from a basic viewpoint, the policy is a failure. It falls on its own weight. But that also has implications for departments of corrections, because you have to reintegrate those individuals into the prison system. So states have become pretty decent at doing that. And oh, by the way, so has the federal government. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, there have been 81 death sentences imposed. So there have been, with 13 executions, 15 executions overall, there's a whole lot of people who've come off of death row and been reintegrated into the Bureau of Prisons. There hasn't been a single instance of the person being deemed a security threat so bad that they need to be shipped away and put in a hole in a mountain in Colorado, the ADX, the ultra high security, maximum, super maximum prison, okay? So we know from experience, because the same guys who are in charge of the federal system now from the Bureau of Prisons have already done it without incident. There is nothing about being a former death row prisoner that makes you more of a security risk than you were when you were a death row prisoner. And yet, the Bureau of Prisons had the ability and exercised it when people were convicted and sentenced to death. They had the ability to determine, well, do they need to go in a more supermax than death row? There were a couple of instances in which they thought yes. A couple of the terrorism cases, and one person who in jail had ordered the hits on 10 victims. Okay. So they thought, okay, those folks require extra security measures. The Bureau of Prisons was able to do it. And nobody in the prison system was harmed by that. So
My question is, how they can mobilize the electrical out of the education? Because it's all an occupied education.
okay.
How we can keep them moving.
Okay. All right. I'm going to answer that question when I finish this one. The question is, what can we do to mobilize the Latino community, Puerto Rican community, and I would add Central American and South American. Okay. I'll get to that. But let me finish up on the federal prisons. The Trump administration decided that they were going to exact vengeance on the individuals who were commuted. And as part of their executive order, they suggested that that all of these people whose death sentences were commuted now be prosecuted by the states and have the states seek the death penalty. Does the Constitution say you can do that? Well, it doesn't say you can't. And the courts have developed a doctrine called dual sovereignty, that if there is a federal crime and a state crime, you can prosecute them in both places. But we're talking about we're talking about crimes that occurred 20 years ago. So if there was any interest at the state level, a legitimate interest, then you would have expected that the prosecution would have occurred then. What has changed in the facts of any of those cases in the intervening 2 decades? One thing: the guys got commuted. That has nothing to do with the circumstances of the offense, and it makes clear that any prosecution would be retaliatory. There are constitutional arguments against retaliatory and vindictive prosecutions. And so, well, frankly, most local prosecutors don't want anything to do with these cases because, from a public safety perspective, what's the point? We're going to waste a lot of money. We're going to force the family members of the victims to endure a whole new range of criminal trials and appeals. And they're going to hold on to their anger and vengeance for years and years and years and never have the opportunity to begin to heal. So why are we going to subject the victim's family members to that? To appease somebody who just wants vengeance? Well, there have been administrative proceedings. And the administrative proceedings all have recommendations that everybody who got commuted will be shipped to ADX, to the hellhole in the mountain, underneath the mountain in Colorado. That has not happened. There are court proceedings that are underway, and you can bet that every issue that I've mentioned to you and many others that I haven't are being raised. But the strategy with this administration has always been to tear down as much as possible because you can only put back together so much. And everything they can get away with tearing down, and once it's torn down is not rebuilt, is considered to be a victory for them. But the lawyers are taking action. We'll see how it turns out, because ultimately who decides? The courts. And how much courage will the courts have to enforce the Constitution when so far they have proven themselves to be nothing but lackeys on many of these issues? Okay. So that's the answer. And it's unsatisfactory because everything that's taking place right now with this administration is unsatisfactory. But I think there will be victories. And some of the victories already are that nobody but the most extreme prosecutors are even considering new capital prosecutions. And part of the victory is that there's been no public clamoring for these additional prosecutions. And there's been no public clamoring for the extension of the federal death penalty. So they are making a lot of noise. They're creating a lot of pain. They are getting bodies onto gurneys. But they are losing the war. We are still ahead, and we are getting farther ahead. We are making inroads. Now, what do we do to get the Latino population more involved? Latino justice. They are becoming much more active and more involved. I think we need to do a lot in the way of public education. The Latino population is largely unaware of the link between the attacks on immigrants and the death penalty, right? And I think this is also where our friends in labor, not who are having children, our friends in the labor movement need to be educated as well. You know, I'm going to publish something later this week because that's just something I do, and it is going to be on wrongful executions in Pennsylvania. And we've done some historical research, and we've identified 5 wrongful executions that have taken place in Pennsylvania, as well as 3 dozen exonerations. And this goes back to the 19th century. When we look at the wrongful executions, there are two clear patterns. One is young black men being framed for murders of white women. The other is, you are part of an immigrant group and we don't like you. But the way that that used to play out was in the union movement. So it's the Molly Maguires and Cole. And it is the steel strike in Pittsburgh. And so they are Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants and Polish immigrants. They are the people who were not white enough to be white at the turn of the century. Just like the people who are not white enough to be white now are the ones who are being targeted. So I think that we need to stress that history and make that history known. And that way we can get more activity among affected communities and among historically affected communities. And when labor goes to work, wonderful things can happen. I think that's an untapped resource for us. This is also an area with the Latino community that Catholic mobilizing is important, because one of the largest growing segments of the Catholic Church are Latinos. We had our first Latin American Pope. We now have our second, because, all right, he's from Chicago. He went to Villanova. But he had all his time in Peru. Okay, so we need to increase activity in Central America, in South America. We're working with the Mexican Capital Legal Assistance Project and the government of Mexico. We just have to pound away. And one of the things that's been overlooked among academics is the disproportionate impact of the death penalty on the Latino community. And so academics need to be activated there too, because we need information for people to be able to go out and let people really know what's going on. Now, nobody listens to me because I have data. They listen to me because you tell them stories, and then I give them data so that they have things they can say about things that you make them feel, right? So don't look at me and think that I'm going to persuade anybody, right? Because you are the voices that matter. But we need to make sure the information is out there and available, and that's a big and important step. Yeah, Randy. One last question.
Craziness is going on like in Alabama. But I have a few people watching Starvin. One girl has somebody on death row. But with our new laws that they just passed in a session to expedite post-conviction relief, a lot of people are thinking that the powers that the EPA and Baton Rouge have overhead now are in the hands of the Attorney General. Can you explain that better for us?
Well, I think the question is about the expedited appeal processes in Louisiana, and I'm not an expert on that, but the Promise of Justice Initiative is, and so they are the best people to talk to. But essentially, there are. This will be very superficial because I don't want to say something stupid and be wrong about it. But in Louisiana, the current governor was the former Attorney General, Jeff Landry. And he was interested in executing as many people as possible, and he still is. And there is a crisis with the funding for indigent defense in Louisiana, and the legislature has made it worse. There is a problem in Louisiana when cases get heard fully on appeal. The problem is they get overturned, and then you don't have the people to execute because, by gosh, they didn't have a constitutional death sentence. Or the 11 exonerations, every single one of which involved intentional prosecutorial misconduct. So it is a classic example of the assault on democracy. And one of the ways you do that is prevent people from being able to have their cases heard in court. So the cases are taking a long time. What they want to do is streamline the appeal process and limit the issues that you can raise, because then prosecutorial misconduct is never going to come out. And no one is going to have the resources to investigate the failures of defense counsel. It is an assault on the judicial process. It goes hand in glove with the assault from the top down by persuading judges that it's not in their interest to enforce constitutional rights. So, I mean, that's the short story. For more details, I'd have to say, check with the Promise of Justice Initiative. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And now I'm not going to take up the rest of the evening because there are plenty of other people with very important things to say.
Thanks, Ross. I told you. I bet you've learned quite a bit right there. See, those are the facts. Those are some facts for your butt. And that's something. Well, I got to tell you about this fight that was on death row between me and my brother. It's humorous now, but during this clemency, he had told his attorney that if they weren't going to give him a pardon, to execute him. And she came out and she told me that, and I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe he said that. I knew he was upset. I knew he was aggravated, but give the attorney a chance. And he and I went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with this till, I mean, I literally got heated. They almost had to throw me up out of there, of me trying to convince this man that he deserves to give that attorney a chance to save his life. He says, no, man. He says, I'm sick of this. I got tired of it. You can see they're not going to be fair with me. They're not going to do any of this. See, so he says, if I'm going to die, at least I'm going to say I'm going to die. So he was trying to take charge of his own death. But I told him, but you're killing me now. And you're killing mom. So, you know, we went at it, and I had to convince him not to let those people execute him so that, you know, it wouldn't affect our mother and everything else. And, you know, it's funny because we laugh about it because he's still alive today, all because of that decision, you know. And that brings me to an exoneree here. Witness to innocence, Mr. Juan Melendez, spent 17 and a half years on Florida's death row. That's what I'm telling you. That's what I'm telling you. You know, it's something, you know, I mean, a lot of people have not been incarcerated. It's a heck of a thing. You know, you can always see when you come up here to the unequal, whatever they want to call that place over there, and you get handcuffed. And anytime you want to stand up for something right, you're being handcuffed, clubbed, shot. You pick it. But this is the American dream, nightmare, whatever you want to call it. We're all sitting here in a state of confusion. But I can tell you one thing, we've got some powerful people in here. This is better than church to me, because everybody in church is not a spiritual warrior. In here, you're coming from choice. You're coming from different religious denominations, different states, different countries. This is the warriors. This is where you're at. So when you go to church next time, nudge somebody and get them involved. I'd like to bring up Juan. Come on, Juan.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I got to say, well, good evening. My name is Juan Roberto Melendez, born in Brooklyn, but I raised in the island of Puerto Rico. Beautiful island. I left the island when I was about 18 years old, looking for what they call the American dream, but returned to the American nightmare. I never forget that day. It was on a Monday, May the 2nd, 1984, while we was working on a field, on an apple tree. Oh, okay. I am from the islands now. We like that in salsa. So we was working in a field. I'm a migrant worker. That's why today I don't sleep too well because of that. Thinking about the migrant workers, thinking about my social security is going away. Or that is, I'm going to bed thinking about that now, but I'm still a happy man. So now I'm in this field doing this work, and here comes we hear noise in the orchards that don't belong in the orchards. But 8 police cars is right in the here, FBI agents, and they stop in front of us and they told us to hit the ground, and we did. Then I hear my name, but I'm scared to get up because there was weapons pointing at me. But I raised my arm, and they told me to get up and walk toward them, and I did. When I got in front of them, they told me to open my mouth. They wanted to see if I had a missing teeth. Today I fixed them. Thank God. So they told me to roll the sleeve of my left arm. They want to see a tattoo, and I did show it to them. Then they said, yes, you are the man we are looking for. You are wonderful, unlawful fly to avoid prosecution with warrants for your arrest for first-degree murder and armed robbery in the state of Florida. So they gave me some rice and slapped some handcuffs on me and took me to a federal prison. FBI agents is the one arrested me. So then they took me to a state court, and they was asking me telling me, did you need an interpreter? I say, no, I don't need an interpreter at that time. So they explained to me about talking about extradition. So I waived it. They started me from the state of Pennsylvania. I was arrested in Mechanicsburg, and from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, back to the state of Florida. They put me in front of a judge in a couple of days, and they was reading the charges to me. You've been arrested for first-degree murder and armed robbery, and the state of Florida is thinking the death penalty to you for you. Since I'm not O.J. Simpson, God rest his soul, I don't have no money, so they appoint a public defender to me. I did not how to understand what he was saying to me, but I remember one thing. He used to pat me in the back and tell me that everything is going to be all right. Don't worry about it, Juan. You're going home. I should go home. I did not commit the crime, so I believed him. So now we go to court. Monday, we picking the jury. Tuesday, we still picking jury. After they pick 11 white, one African American person, no Hispanic, I'm Hispanic, 6 women, 6 men. The red instruction to the jury how to conduct themselves in a first-degree murder case. Wednesday, that's when the evidence come in, and this is what they had against me. They have what they call a police informant, what they call in the streets a snitch. He claims that I confessed the crime to him. He implicates a friend of mine. He gets arrested. My friend gets arrested. He gets interrogated. He gets trained with the electric chair. And all he had to say was, I took him to the scene of the crime. So he makes a deal. The law to make deals. So he makes a deal. He gets a charge for accessory after the facts, 2 years probation. And he testified that he took me to the scene of the crime, don't know what happened, to after it happened. So now, and this is the entire evidence. I got alibi evidence saying that I was with her when it happened. A married woman. She presented the wedding anniversary to the court. She risked that She was separate from her husband. And to celebrate the wedding anniversary, she celebrated with me. And that was the day the murder occurred. And I got people correspond to her testimony, but didn't count. I had people saying that where the type of person I was, good things, but didn't amount to nothing. So Thursday, they found me guilty. Friday, at 10 p.m. in the morning, I was already sentenced to death. And the judge complained that the whole process was taking too long. So they sent me to death row. I'll never forget that day too. It was not a beautiful day. It was on a Tuesday, November the 2nd, 1984. It was raining. They took me to the cell. It was 6 by 9 foot. Never forget it. They locked it up. I have all in front of me is bars and walls. I got scared because that Tuesday arriving there, that Thursday they executed the 10 persons in the state of Florida. So in my head, I don't know too much English, don't know the law. I'm thinking they're executing people every week. So I took the sheets from my bunk and I cut it all in pieces, and I made little ropes with it. Took the little ropes and I tied the cell door bars. I tied the cell door bars. So when they push the button in the control room, the door is moving nowhere. So I'm thinking, by the time they come and get me, I just confide him. I'm not walking to that chair. So now I'm doing exercise, and I'm trying to make muscles come out of my eyebrows because I'm trying to scare these people. I'm trying to intimidate them, but all the time I'm the one intimidated. I'm the one scared all the time, paranoid. So I'm doing my exercise. It's a count time, and here comes the office doing his round of count. And he stops in front of my cell. When he sees the cell all tied up, he gets very angry. He starts cursing. I did not know too much English, but I didn't know how to curse. So in a very, very bad way, I remind him of his mother, father, all the way down. So now him in the correctional office and I, we discussing each other's out. And the rest of the condemned men to death, they got involved in the argument. But to my surprise, it was against me. They tell me, "You're wrong. All you do is get up in the morning and get in the cell little bars and nag and cry about your innocence. You don't know no English. You don't know nothing." And then I got very angry with them. But then I started thinking, because they also told me, "But we can teach you." And then the ones that told me how to read, told me how to write, and told me how to speak English. And I survived because of that. And I spent 17 years. It was terrible. One of the things that I'm trying to get to talk about is my mama and my aunts. But I'm losing them now. I'm 74 years old. I lost my mama two years ago. It was terrible. And this organization, I always gonna be in debt with them. They paid the way so I can see her, and I got to see her. My mama and my aunts. I don't know how the aunts are in these days, but in my days, if I did something wrong, my aunt would grab me and whoop me. And then I got to pray to God that she don't tell mama, because she tell mama's gonna be another ass whooping. But when I was hungry, they always feed me. And when I needed clothes and shoes, they always bought it for me. And in death row, they never forgot me. They always wrote me letters and tell me and tell me that of my cousin that born, and I never saw him, and I saw all of them grow up to pictures. And that's sad too. I only got one left, one in left. So Mama was the stronger one. She always told me not to lose hope. She believed in me. I didn't raise no killers. I know you're not a killer. And she believed me, and that helped me survive. And the learning how to read and write helped me survive. But the most important thing for me is when I got out, and the people that I had met. See, my thinking was, well, I'm gonna go home, take a hamaca, tie it up in 2 palm trees, and give me a gallon of rum, and try to forget that this ever happened. That's what my thoughts. But it was not like that. Came out, reporters. They wanted me to do a press conference, and I did it. And then I realized the ones that I left behind. Then I realized, hey, you didn't get out just to drink rum and be in a hamaca. You get out to fight. And you're going to find the people that are going to help you fight. And I got them all here in front of me. You people don't know how strong you have made me. You have made me a man to care, especially that man right there. We've been in conference together. And I'm not going to lie to you. If I would have met some of you, I probably would have, I would me live with a woman that I live right now. Because when I was out, when I was inside, I was always thinking, I say, if I ever get out of here and I hook up with a woman, she got to be a lawyer. And it happened. I lived with a lawyer for almost 22 years. And I'm happy with her. She's getting better and better every year. And I'm the one going down and down, but she always helped me get up. She's a hell of a woman. She's Irish and a Puerto Rican. What the hell? What a combination. But anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is, if I would not met it for all of you, I think my life would have been maybe back over there or in dark places. With all of you, I found the light, and I'm gonna keep it, because all of you, you'll never stop. You keep going, and that helped me to keep going with all of you too. I love you.
That was great, man. That was great. You know, I heard you say that you learned to read, you learned to speak English. You know, so many things that you learned in there. You know, some people go into prison, they come out, they don't learn anything, and they go back in there. So, you know, I'm listening to that word, you know, learn. So that's incredible, man. You were able to come in and articulate to us. You know, your story was great, and that the main thing that got me is what you had learned, because you're in everybody's speaking English. So, you know, you had to learn to speak that also, or yeah, you probably would not have survived. So my hat's off to you. This next speaker, I'm quite sure everyone knows him. He's one of my favorite speakers, because every time he talks, I learn something. He you know, to me, he brings things to me in such a way that it's always a lesson. There's always a teaching. And it's funny because, and I mentioned it to him because he delivers it to me in such a way that I can deliver it to my children. You understand? I don't need them to save me. I need them to help me save my children. And He says, I embarrassed him. But, you know, if he were to come to my house, my kids would literally say, that's Shane Claiborne. My mother listens to him because she says, who are you listening to? And I enjoy it because it soothes me. You know, he doesn't yell, he doesn't scream. It's just a nice little conversation teaching lesson. And, you know, with that, I'm going to let him come up here and tell you guys. But, you know, Mr. Shane Claiborne.
Well, I go a lot of places to speak, but I come here to listen. Because as I've come to these over the years, I felt like this is just a summit of hope and healing. And part of the storytelling is, you know, the old Catholic priest Henry Nouwen said we're wounded healers, right? We're wounded healers. And this is a group of folks that are healing together. And I just think, I hope everybody in the country listens to the people these next 4 days. And y'all that are listening in, spread the word. Tell everybody you know, like, listen into this, because this is the healing stuff. I mean, Bill Pelkey, when I first saw him, it was in a documentary. Half the people in here have been in documentaries, but it's the stories, I think, that move us. And I started thinking, what can I contribute to this group? Because for me, I started to see this is bigger than the death penalty, right? This is about the death penalty. But the more you look into the death penalty, you see that this opens up all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's no coincidence that the same places that are executing right now were the places that were lynching folks 100 years ago. It's no coincidence that the same states that held on to slavery the longest are the same states holding on to the death penalty. So there's all that there, but it's also the theological piece of it, right? We're a diverse movement. We got people of all different faiths and people that aren't religious. But as a Christian, one of the things that haunted me is that where Christians are most concentrated in America is where the death penalty continues to linger. The death penalty wouldn't stand a chance in America if Christians stood up for mercy and for life and decided to abolish it. As my friend Dale Restinella said, the Bible Belt is the death belt in America. And so that messes with me. So I just want to offer a reflection to poke a hole in some of the theology. We're not going to go get too deep. I know we've been out in the sun. We've been doing it all day. But I just want to say, like, when you poll people, Christian, not religious at all, when you just ask people in general, is there a verse of the Bible that you know? The most cited answer is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In fact, Donald Trump, who my wife and I call him Diggity, not to insult him, just because we don't want to say his name all the time. So we call him Diggity. So I'll just refer to him as Diggity. But Diggity, when he was asked about the Bible, that's the verse he cited, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, when you look at that, this is an old, thousands of year old framework for thinking about justice, right? That allowed for reciprocal harm. So it allowed for a person to hurt the person who hurt them back. It's actually called lex talionis, and that's a fancy word, but all it means is where we get the idea of retaliation from, right? So you could hurt them back in the same way, but there were all these constructs that showed you had to hurt them exactly the way that they hurt you. So Randy, if you poke my eye out, I had to poke your left eye out if it was my left eye. If you broke my arm, you look nice. I'm sure you wouldn't. But if you did, I had to break the same arm, and I couldn't go burn down your mama's house or something. I had to only mirror the very harm that you did to me. Now, my rabbinical friends actually taught me a lot about this, because even my most conservative rabbi friends, who I've got some real conservative ones, we don't agree on a lot of things. But he said, but here's the thing. We never really use the death penalty. In fact, the rabbi said if there's more than one execution in 70 years, something's wrong with our society. And he said, you know, this idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, we know that we can do better. And he said that's why the rabbis used it as a construct, but they challenged the very construct itself. And Jews are against the death penalty. He said the irony is it's the Christians who are using the Bible, often the Hebrew Bible, to defend the death penalty. And then he goes, this is my rabbi friend, he goes, and you guys have Jesus. Well, you have to reconcile it all with, right? And so, but as you look at it, we know better, right? We know better. Like we don't rape people who rape to show that rape is wrong. We know we would never teach our kids that if someone pokes your eye out, you should poke their eye out. We know that we can do better than mirroring the evil. And that's why it's also so beautiful, you know, when Jesus does come, Jesus says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? Moses told you this, but then he tells us that we don't even have to return the harm. It might be legal, but that doesn't make it right, right? He transcends the law and says, don't even hurt them back. And that's why, I ain't trying to preach, I'm just saying, that's why it makes so much sense that Jesus interrupted an execution, right? One of the most beautiful, iconic stories in Scripture, a woman caught in adultery, because, by the way, it wasn't just capital murder that was a death-worthy crime. There are over 30 crimes that warranted the death penalty in Scripture. One of them was working on the Sabbath. I always say everybody but Chick-fil-A would be in trouble on that one, you know, but like all the disrespecting your parents was a capital crime. So anyway, this woman drugged before the town, getting ready to be killed, and all the men are ready to kill her with their stones, and Jesus interrupts the execution. It's odd, because the first thing in the Bible that it says is he dug in the dirt and wrote something, and no one knows what he wrote. So we just asked the kids, what do you think Jesus wrote? And one of the kids said, maybe Jesus wrote, where is the man? We're like, that's a good one, right? And one of the other kids said, maybe Jesus wrote, if this doesn't work, run, woman. That was my favorite. But we don't know what he wrote, but we know what he did next. And what Jesus did next is after he writes, I think maybe he was getting a little time, just getting a little liminal space. He stands up and he says, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. And he'll remind us all that if you've called someone a fool, if you've hated someone in your heart, you've committed murder. If you've looked at someone with lust, you're an adulterer. Like, none of us is above reproach, and no one is beyond redemption. And all the stones fall, the men walk away, and Jesus is with the woman. He goes, where'd they all go? But it's beautiful, right? And so I think even across all different streams of life, we come together, and one of the most fundamental questions that the death penalty raises for all of us is anyone beyond redemption? Don't we believe that, as Brian Stevenson says, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done? That we've always got to leave room for transformation. There's other questions too, right? Like, do we trust the state to kill? Come on, that's another night. But anyway, do we trust the state to kill? Like, one of the earliest Christian voices said, it is wrong to kill, whether it's done by an individual or by a government or a president or a governor. It's always wrong to kill. And that's what this group has been saying for over 30 years at the Fast and Vigil. It's people in this room who have every reason to hate, and you refuse to hate. As Dr. King said, I've seen too much hate to hate. Hate's too big a burden to bear. And so the folks here, I think, are national treasures. I mean, this summit is about the death penalty, but it's also about what will heal the wounds. It's also the truth that an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. If only we could learn that in the conflict and the war and the genocide in Israel and Gaza, if only we could learn that in our country, in our schools, in our homes. I mean, we're trying to teach our kids two wrongs don't make a right. And in some ways, it is that simple, right? That we refuse to hate. We refuse to mirror the evil, and we insist in healing the wounds. So this group of wounded healers, I think is one of the great lights, all the convergence of folks. I hope we keep, I mean, part of what we got to do is just keep amplifying these voices, because people do change their mind. I mean, one of the last times I saw Rob Dunham in person, it's nice not to be on screens, Kathleen was there, right? Was when our governor, Shapiro, changed his mind. And listen to this. The reason he changed his mind on the death penalty, he named 2 reasons in this press conference that we were at. One of them was he went to the victims of the Tree of Life shooting, targeted hatred and anti-Semitism that opened fire in a mass shooting in Pennsylvania. And he said, but I listened to the victims. And they said, the death penalty won't heal the wounds. Listening to the victims. And he said, I listened to my little kid. And his son was there, little boy. And the governor's son, he said, was asking him, why do we do this? Why do we kill people? And every time our government kills, it's teaching our children the lie that violence heals the wounds of violence. And so we refuse that lie, and we keep amplifying the voices of murder victims' families, of the exonerees, of all the folks here who have been impacted and have every reason to hate, but refuse to hate and choose love and compassion like our brother Bill Pelkey. So it's always a gift to be here with you and to vigil together, stand together, and raise our voices together. Tomorrow we're going to have a few visitors, right? And some of you may have been a part of the Moral Mondays movement, Repairs of the Breach. And I think it's kind of a divine appointment. And if you don't believe in God, then it's just cool. You know, like that we changed, the date was shifted around several times, and there's going to be a convergence around the bill that's going to cut resources to so many vulnerable folks and raise the military budget to over $1 trillion. So there'll be a lot of folks visiting tomorrow, and we've worked it out, bro. That I get to be John the Baptist preparing the way, and we're going to hear from Charles tomorrow. But it's going to be, I think this movement needs more and more folks joining it. So thanks for joining online. Thanks for being here. And it's just a gift for me to stand with all of you. Truly, every time I'm with you, it just lifts my spirit, warms my heart. So thank you.
Well, this is only day 1. We've got a few more to go. We got some very powerful speakers. You're starting to feel that spirit. You're feeling yourself warming up as people talking. You know, that's what lets you know you're in there. Hi, Mom. Letting you know we got it going on. I got these warriors in here. You know, she doesn't say go to church. She used to say that to everybody. Go to church. She doesn't say that now. She said, may God bless you. You know, because there's a difference. There's big differences. Right now, we want to bring back Abe Bonowitz. He's got a little more information to give you, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Charles. Everybody, Charles Keith. Well, can we have another round of applause for all of these speakers? So we're winding down day 1 here of the annual fast and vigil, and we'll need to be out of the building by 9 o'clock. So once we're done here, especially if you are one of the people that has come in from hearing that this is happening and you haven't gotten your shirts or registered or whatever, please see us before you go. There's that. Tomorrow, it's really important that we have as many people here by 9 o'clock or 9:15, 9:30 at the latest, right? So we're looking be here 9-ish, right? So that we can, actually earlier than that, we're in the building at 8, right, Scott? In fact, because we'll probably get in a little bit of trouble for having all of our stuff out in the alcoves, we need to be here to get it out and be ready to get set up because tomorrow's a business day. There'll be people walking to work and all that. Hopefully the weather will be cooperative. But at 10 o'clock, we are having what we call a media availability. It's not exactly a press conference, but the idea is get the media, invite them to come to meet us, to hear from us. They've been told that we have over 60 people registered from over 25 states. Actually, it's over 28 states now. So often we'll get people who are, their job is to send stories from DC back to your state. And we're telling them that there'll be somebody here from Alabama, there'll be somebody here from New Mexico, and come and interview them. We'll see what we get, right? We're up against this Congress, this bill that they're trying to pass. So that's happening at 10 o'clock. It'll look kind of like a rally. We all need to be on site and in person. Tomorrow's an exciting day also. Shane mentioned that Reverend Barber and the repairers of the breach are going to be here. So by 11 o'clock, they're all going to come. And we also want to integrate with them and be a part of that. And they have very graciously accepted having a couple of people from the Fast and Vigil be a part of their program, even though it's not about the death penalty, right? So it's super cool. And in addition, in fact, I can't imagine anybody will be a part of that group that wouldn't also want to be a part of this group. We want to be sure to be inviting them in to what we're up to, right? And simply by being present for that. Then be a little bit of time to get back to what we normally do, which is our vigiling and being present in front of the court. We'll have another program like this tomorrow evening. And then we'll come back on, so tomorrow's Monday, we'll come back on Tuesday. And that's when the Fast and Vigil becomes continuous. And we will be, all through the day, no special programming on the 1st, July 1st, but we don't end. We'll have another program in the evening like this, and then we stay out overnight, all night. Some of us actually sleep on the sidewalk here in front of the court. We maintain this 24-hour vigil all the way to the end of the day on the night of July 2nd. So again, another program. Actually, I should mention the program on Tuesday, July 1st, will be emceed by TJ Riggs from Amnesty International, and Amnesty is putting together that whole program, and we're especially grateful for all of our sponsors, but Amnesty International put in a significant amount of resources to making this happen, in addition to, on top of that, bringing a bunch of Amnesty people here. So, and that's the kind of thing. The Journey of Hope has been doing that. Having their board meeting at this event so that all their people get a trip to DC and they can be here to participate. And we're going to be hearing from more Journey people too. The Marianist Social Justice Collaborative did a fundraiser as part of their they raised money for their 3 big initiatives this year, one of which was supporting this event. It's an opportunity for organizations to engage. So I'm sorry to say that there's going to have to be a 33rd annual Fast and Vigil. So if this is spurring ideas for you or your organization, start thinking about it now and talk to Scott, talk to me. We'll figure it out, whatever you need to do to make it happen. So, of course, well, Witness to Innocence is also, thank you. We're going to hear from Sujat Graham one of these nights. He's here tonight just to hear the story, but he's going to tell us his story. The other thing, and then so just to wrap up for July 2nd, we'll get to midnight after the event, the evening of July 2nd. Then we'll have be all hands on deck to kind of wrap this up and pack it up and all that. And then as long as the weather cooperates, then we will be circling up outside at about 11:15, 11:30, and having some final thoughts. And then at midnight, we get to break our fast. Many people here are actually fasting on some level or another. If you're one of the people fasting, raise your hands. Look at that. Look at that. That's a whole bunch of people. So thank you all for that extra suffering. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that tomorrow is also potentially a very historic day. Rob mentioned this, but in Delaware, they're going to be voting on the bill to prohibit the death penalty from being used in that state in its constitution. And that's a big deal. Delaware will be only the 2nd state to prohibit executions constitutionally. We still have to get it through a whole other session, but we'll be monitoring that, and I'm doing my best to try to get somebody from Delaware down here to tell us the Delaware story. The good news is we have the Delaware bell, and we'll be tolling that in celebration. So with that, those are the things that are happening. And we're grateful for everybody being here. This is actually one of the biggest attendances that we have had for this event. We have to keep growing it. We're excited about that. And with that, are there any quick logistical questions? Okay. So we're in here in part because it was rained for, you mean during the day? I think we're outside. I think unless it's a dangerous storm, we're going to be outside because that's our thing at 10 o'clock. But more important, I mean, Shane, do you know if they have a plan? It will be here unless it's like a massive storm. And then other questions. There's another one. All right. With that, please welcome back Art Laffin from the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker and a Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing to take us out for the evening. There you go.
Well, for a closing song, I got to thinking about that we're all on a journey of hope from violence to healing, every single one of us, including those who are not here who are supporting us. And Brother Shane reminded us about that we are, in fact, are wounded healers. Henry now was a friend of mine, and he certainly was a wounded healer himself. And so when we think about the challenge before us, I believe that all things are possible. All things are possible, including abolishing state-sanctioned killing. It's just a matter of time, and we're doing our part right now. In Psalm 46, there's a verse. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. And this is such a beautiful, powerful stream that's making glad the city of God, our community here. And so the song that I like to offer is called Healing River. And some of you know it, and it's a call response. And it goes like this. Oh, healing river, oh, healing river, send down your waters, send down your waters, send down your waters upon this land. Oh, healing river, send down your waters and wash the blood from off this land. Oh, healing river, send down your waters, send down your waters upon this land. Oh, healing river, send down your water and wash the blood from off this land. This land is thirsting. This land is parching. No seed is growing in the barren ground. Oh, healing river, send down your water. Oh, healing river, send your waters down. Let the seed of freedom, awake and flourish. Let your deep roots nourish. Let your tall stalks rise. Oh, seed of freedom, awake and flourish. Proud leaves uncurling unto the sky. Oh, healing river, send down your waters. Send down your waters upon this land. O healing river, send down your waters and wash the blood from off this land.